Our last video briefly touched on some of the ways that mise-en-scene can be used to provide characterization in movies through production design. Before we look at the other ways that this is done through costumes, makeup, hairstyles, staging, and performance, it might be helpful to pause for a moment to consider that characterization is one of the places where we see two different elements of film form, narrative and mise-en-scene, intersect. When it comes to investing characters with unique, individual personalities and traits, as well as to bringing them to life on screen, characterization in movies is done primarily in three ways. The script, which is what the movie's narrative comes from, contributes to characterization by determining what characters say and do. Staging and performance contribute to characterization by determining how characters say and do those things, so how they speak, how they move, and how they do the things that it is written in the script that they do. Costumes, makeup, and hairstyles determine how characters look, and also help to individuate characters by investing them with a personal style of dress and appearance. In movies, costumes and costume design include everything that characters wear, both clothing and accessories. Makeup and hairstyles, and their respective design processes, involve everything pertaining to the physical appearances of characters, things like hair color and styles, their overall grooming, eye color, skin texture and color, etc. Because movies frequently require actors to go through radical physical alterations in order to become the characters that they portray, hairstyles in movies include the use of wigs and false mustaches or beards, while makeup includes cosmetics, but also the use of prosthetics, body padding, false eyelashes, false teeth, false fingernails, contact lenses, and digitally rendered alterations or enhancements to their physical appearances that are done using CGI. So, for example, in Citizen Kane, director Orson Welles, who made the movie when he was 25 years old, also plays the role of Charles Foster Kane at various periods in his life, from his 20s through his 70s. To age him up to portray the character in middle age and as a senior citizen, bald caps, body padding, and various prosthetics were used along with cosmetics to alter both his facial features and his bodily appearance. Prosthetics were also used to create Kylo Ren's scar in The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker, as well as to provide Freddy Krueger with his burn scars in the Nightmare on Elm Street horror movie franchise. In those films, the actor is actually wearing a latex mask that gives the skin of the character both the appearance and the texture of healed burns. In Guardians of the Galaxy, cosmetics give Yondu his blue skin tone, while in Black Panther, computer-generated imaging was used to transform the body of actor Andy Serkis, who has not had an arm amputated above the elbow, into that of Ulysses Klaue, who has. As with production design, costumes, makeup, and hairstyles are another component of mise-en-scene that can be used to communicate implicit meaning that provides the audience with story information. Characters' personal appearances and their individual personal styles in terms of dress and grooming, the way that they style their bodies, gives us visual information about their personalities, their tastes, and their interests. It also gives us visual information about characters' life circumstances, their ages, their gender identities, their socioeconomic statuses, and their jobs, since these are all things that in our culture we express through a manner of dress and/or body presentation. So, for example, in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, we first learn that Miles' mother is a nurse when we see her dressed for work in her nurse's uniform. In The Breakfast Club, the different high school cliques or social groups that each of the students identifies as a member of is signaled through the way that they dress and through their personal grooming. In Crazy Rich Asians, the character of Peek Lin has a quirky personality that is expressed through her offbeat style of dress. And in Medicine for Melancholy, Jo's t-shirt identifies her as a fan of the filmmaker Barbara Loden long before she shares that fact, while the Tom Waits t-shirt worn by Pete in Knocked Up and the Talking Heads t-shirt worn by Elio in Call Me By Your Name both tell us something about their taste in music. Likewise, just as with production design, costumes, makeup, and hairstyles can also be used to communicate implicit meaning that is symbolic or that is thematic. In other words, symbolic but also directly related to one of the movie's themes. There are a lot of different ways that this can be done, but one of the most common is the ways in which changes in characters' physical appearances can be used to symbolize changes in those characters, whether it is changes to their life circumstances, changes to their emotional states, or some other kind of change. This can be a relatively routine change, such as showing the process of the character aging through the years as in Citizen Kane, or it can be something more profound, such as using Richie's change of appearance in the Royal Tenenbaums to symbolize the emotional catharsis that he experiences and the new approach to living his life that he embraces after surviving a suicide attempt. We also see this in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse through the subtle changes in Peter B. Parker's appearance as he regains his confidence and his sense of purpose, and he recommits to his superhero mission as a result of becoming Miles' mentor. In this case, his more put-together appearance at the end of the film reflects the fact that he is in the process of putting himself and his life back together after his divorce, and also possibly putting his marriage back together. One of the oldest, and still one of the more common, symbolic uses of costumes, makeup, and hairstyles is the way that villains are often visually identified by being dressed in dark colors. Not all villains dress in dark colors, and sometimes heroes in movies like Batman do, so this is not absolute, and it is not true of every movie. But it is a long-standing representational convention that is used in a lot of movies. This is a representational convention that originated in movie westerns, where the villain was often shown wearing a black hat, while the hero wore a white hat. That color coding as a way of visually identifying the heroes and the villains in movies is still widely used today. The Star Wars example also provides an illustration of another representational trope that uses makeup to visually identify villains in movies. In the case of Kylo Ren, the scar on his face follows a long and decidedly ableist tradition of using scars as well as physical disabilities, body traits that are both culturally perceived as physical flaws, as a signifier of inner character flaws or moral failings that are externally manifested on the body in ways that symbolically mark the villains as villains. In Bartholomew's song, we see a thematic use of costumes and hairstyles, with the identical clothing and haircuts of all the characters, not to mention the exclusive casting of white actors, which gives all the characters the identical skin tones, visually symbolizing the high level of conformity that defines the world of the film. Of course, we see this in the synchronized movements of the characters as well, which provides an illustration of how costumes, makeup, and hairstyles intersect with both staging and performance when it comes to characterization through mise-en-scene. In movies, staging refers to the arrangement of people and objects within the space that we see on screen in any given shot. It also encompasses the movement of people within that space, the technical term for which is the blocking of the shot. So in other words, when a character moves and where they move to. None of these things happen spontaneously in movies. Staging is meticulously and deliberately planned out for every shot by the director, the DP, or director of photography, which is another term for the cinematographer, and the actors. Staging has a practical use in that it takes the plot events and the character actions that are described in the movie's script and enacts them on screen. Staging can also sometimes have a symbolic use in that it can also be used to communicate implicit meaning. This is what we see in terms of both the uniform positioning and the synchronized movements of the characters in Bartholomew's song, which uses staging along with production design, costumes, makeup, hairstyles, and performance in ways that are all connected to the movie's themes. One of the more common uses of staging is to either visually suggest or visually emphasize relationship dynamics between characters in the film. Probably the most famous example of this comes from the breakfast table montage in Citizen Kane, which shows the dissolution of Charles Foster Kane's first marriage over the course of several years, through a series of brief scenes of he and his wife having breakfast. At the beginning of their marriage, we see them sitting close together, smiling and talking. Towards the end of their marriage, we see them sitting on opposite ends of the table, reading different newspapers and ignoring one another. In both cases, the staging of the scene reflects the shift from closeness to alienation, as the growing physical distance between them is used to symbolize their growing emotional distance. Similarly, the adversarial and deeply antagonistic relationship between T'Challa and Eric in Black Panther are suggested by their poses and facial expressions in this shot, while Miles's admiration for Peter B. Parker is likewise suggested by the way he mimics Peter's pose in this shot from Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Finally, in the Royal Tenenbaums, the character of Margot, who is adopted and feels like an outsider in the Tenenbaum family, is frequently shown standing apart and at a visible distance from the other members of the family when they are all together. In all of these examples of staging, we also see intersections with performance, as implicit meaning is communicated both through the positioning of characters and through their movements, body language, and facial expressions. Performance is another term for acting. It includes all of the choices that actors make about posture, body language, movement, gestures, facial expressions, tone of voice, speech patterns, and vocal intonations as they perform their roles, and bring the characters that they portray to life on screen. Because performance is another place where we see aspects of narrative and aspects of mise-en-scène intersecting, I think it might be helpful to emphasize that when we are analyzing performance in a movie, we are not analyzing what characters say or do. Those things are determined by the script and are part of the movie's narrative. So if a character cries, gets angry and yells, or jumps up and down because they are excited about something, that is not acting. The script tells them to do that. Instead, performance is how the characters say and do the things that are written in the script. So how the actor chooses to cry, how the actor chooses to yell or jump up and down with excitement, since there are different ways that a character can do those same things. Before we move on to discussing lighting, which is the final component of mise-en-scène that will be discussed in our next video, we need to consider one final aspect of both production design and staging, which is that they both can sometimes serve a purely aesthetic function rather than a narrative, thematic, or symbolic one. When we talk about a movie's aesthetic or about the aesthetics of a particular image in a movie, we are talking about the things that make the image either visually beautiful or visually striking. So, for example, in the case of this image from Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, or this image from last year at Marienbad, there is not necessarily any kind of deeper meaning behind the staging of these shots. Here, the motivation behind both the staging and the production design is to make the shots visually pleasing, as well as interesting to look at. We are going to see this same balance between narrative, symbolic, and aesthetic uses of mise-en-scène when it comes to movie lighting, which is the subject of our next video.